I am here talking with Roni Rega, who is a member care associate and spiritual care facilitator at Team. Roni has spent 2 years abroad as a teacher in Haiti. She has a master's degree in psychology, and she's also a spiritual director. And now with Team, she plays a key role in helping missionaries thrive in full-time ministry. And I will say for myself as marketing director at Team, when I talk with missionaries, Roni, I hear your name over and over again of like, how do people get through those first little bits of their missionary careers? You've been such a great help to our people. So thank you for that. And thank you for being here with me.
Thank you.
I wanted to start just by asking you to explain what member care is. It's something that we talk about a lot at Team, but I don't think it's a very familiar term to most people.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I don't think I knew what member care was till I came to Team. So in general, it's a holistic care of a global worker. So we care about their spiritual walk, their emotional well-being, the health of their relationships, their physical body, their physical care, mentally. I mean, so anyways, just a holistic care of our global workers, and we want them to be well.
That's great. So let's dive into some of those first year expectations that missionaries might have. I think one of the interesting things about going into missions in this day and age is that travel is so much more common than any other time in missionary history. Obviously, coronavirus has put some things on hold, but still, so many of us have done short-term mission trips. Maybe we spent a summer abroad or a semester abroad. And so I think it's really easy for a lot of us to feel like, okay, I've experienced culture shock. I've navigated a city in another language. I know what this is going to be like. But then when you talk to missionaries, they say, no, like living abroad, moving there long-term, even the first year is nothing like kind of what they expected it to be or what their previous experiences were. And I was wondering if you could share just a little bit about what is the difference between going on one of these really valuable short-term experiences versus moving and experiencing a first year abroad when you know you're going to be there long-term.
Yeah, I mean, from just a practical difference is typically when you do a internship or some of those, there's not an expectation that you're going to really get competent in the language. Like you might get a little language, but you're doing ministry, you're rolling up your sleeves and you're jumping into that. And when you're planning to live in your new country, you are going to language school full-time. It's a real cultural immersion. And often you're not even doing ministry. I mean, a lot of ministry areas really prefer that their people really focus on language and culture. So that's probably the biggest difference. And it has its impact in terms of people feel pretty incompetent. They feel like a little kid because they can't even if they're not doing any. It sort of bumps into, like, we don't realize our performance becomes sort of an issue, and we don't even realize how much that sort of made us feel good about ourselves. So it takes a hit on people's ego and self-esteem, and if they're even conscientious at all, they're wanting to do it well and they can't. And so anyway, it's a difficult season for those that are in that process, even though they have supporters and people that are behind them and they know God called them there. It still is a really hard season.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people, when they are thinking about long-term ministry, usually it's people who have been vetted really well. They're people who have been successful in ministry. Hopefully it's people who've been successful in ministry in their home country. And so I think the expectation, not only for missionaries, but for supporters as well, can be, oh, well, they're going to go overseas and they're going to start, winning people to the Lord day one. And yeah, that can be a kind of disappointment for both the missionary and the supporters if you're not prepared well for that. What's kind of the importance of still giving it that time to learn the language instead of just jumping straight into headlong into ministry?
Yeah, I mean, I think the desire is that people really do get the language so it can become sort of their heart language.
Mm.
So it can really shortcut that process. I mean, I've heard people have regrets that they didn't stick with the language, and some of it is there's needs, there's ministry needs, so they want to jump in and they want to help with those needs. Sometimes it's just so uncomfortable. But I would say to shortcut the process is not to their benefit. If they can stick with it, even though it feels horrible, and just keep engaging in it for the long term, it really does serve their ministry to just get to know the language as best as they can, engage in activities that help them know the culture, really stay with that program. I would think that is what most of the ministry areas would ask new people to do.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. So we've talked about language, and that's a big one. But what are some of the other, I guess, common surprises a missionary might face in their first year?
Yeah, I know this sounds like such a downer, but I mean, I think it's the emotional well-being takes a hit because there's people can feel anxious, they can feel lonely, they can get depressed. I mean, emotionally, I don't know that even though at missionary orientation, like do their best to prepare people that this is going to be hard, but I think it still surprises them that it was harder than they thought. So I think I don't know if this happens all the time, but I think sometimes people second guess their calling.
Mm.
And, that's probably the most, if you want to call it dangerous, that you don't, but it does take a reminding oneself, like, why did I come here? How did the Lord call me here? How did this all happen? And really digging into their call again, even though they had the call. But I do think that helps with some of the uh, just transitioning and leaning into the discomfort until it gets better. Because it does get better, it does, but it's
Yeah.
a rough season.
Yeah. I've talked to a number of missionaries who have said, we really wish you would just encourage people to go at least 2 years, because in the first year you're figuring out where you belong and like what your niche is, and you're not going to find it all that first year. And so they said if you go for 1 year, you can end that first year feeling kind of discouraged, like it hasn't all come together. But they said that second year is where the second year is where it really comes to life and you're figuring things out. And yeah, I think it is one of those things that just takes longer to figure out than most of us expect it to.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so yeah, we've talked about like some of the challenges, but I know you've worked with a lot of missionaries within their first year. Like, what are some of the, on a more positive note, like what are some of the exciting things that happen during your first year?
Yeah, I was thinking about this today, and I mean, it's sort of a pro and a con, I guess. But one family in particular, I think too, because they were exceptionally feeling lonely, even though there were other people, they were kind of busy in their ministry, and somehow they felt a little alone. But I just remember her describing, like, our family is such a strong island. Like, they really bonded together in a way that their family hadn't bonded. And I would say marriages go through a hit because it's stressful on everybody. But again, there are some cases where people really bond and rally together and, just hold on to the Lord and what he has for them.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. And I know it is like it is a different experience for um, people who are going over with kids versus like maybe a couple or a single person. What like how does bringing kids? I mean, that brings in a whole other dynamic when you've got little people. um, what are some of the unique challenges or joys of bringing kids to the mission field?
Yeah. Well, I'll say like children can be an automatic friend maker. Like because kids will get to know other kids, and so it can be a way that natural ministry occurs. I know that educating children is something that people have to prepare for ahead of time. They need to know what are the schools that their kids can attend and what's that going to be like. I would say in general, if mom and dad, even though it's a struggle, as long as their kids know that they're loved, that's stabilizing. That's a stable place for them. So yeah, they're together. They're working through some of the transition together, but I think kids are pretty resilient, to be honest, in general, pretty resilient. If the parents are doing as well as they can do, really, the kids are pretty resilient.
Yeah. Yeah, and on the note of figuring out education and things, team has resources. So when we're sending people over, we're helping you come up with that education plan. And I'll actually drop in the comments after this a link to a little guide that we've created for how to kind of think through those things. Yeah, so we've kind of talked about like the challenges. But then I want to give people some practical tools for themselves and also just understanding of how a missions agency can help them. Because, we don't always know what to ask for. Even when we're facing the challenges themselves, we don't necessarily know, well, what could have helped me in this situation? So, Roni, I wanted to ask, what does team do to help missionaries prepare for that first year or for their lifetime of ministry?
Yeah, our learning and development group has created a wonderful missionary orientation. It comes in two parts. I know during COVID it's a little different, but normally people gather and there's a lot of different sessions. I suppose it can feel like drinking from a fire hose because it is a lot of information to take in, but a lot of good stuff for what they're going to need for when they get there. I know each appointee has an appointee mentor, and I think all of those mentors are former missionaries. So they have some life experience in this and are walking with them before they go. And then member care, I mean, we're here to help. I will say, again, this is sort of prior to becoming an appointee, but we do require a psychological assessment. So in that process, we're trying to help people really know, are they resilient for what cross-cultural living requires? And it also, they get a little bit of a conversation with someone about their strengths and their vulnerabilities. So when they do get overseas, I mean, probably they know their strengths and vulnerabilities, but there can be a way to talk it through, like how this might play out when you're heading to your place of service. So anyway, there's probably more stuff we do, but those are the things that come to mind.
Yeah, yeah. And then once they get to that field, we have kind of a global network of people who are there on the field in various places. So how does that work for a missionary on the field? How do they continue to get that kind of support?
Yeah, I mean, it does require people asking for help, to be honest, at some level. So I do hope people don't just try to push through. I mean, we would love for them to just reach out when there's a need or even the beginning of a need. It's better to go for it early on than wait for it to become a crisis. But in terms of the global group, like who's out there, we have regional member care people in a variety of countries, and they aren't necessarily in the country where the person is serving, but they're closer than the US. They're a flight away, perhaps, but still closer in proximity, closer to the time zone if you need to set up a virtual call. So the regional member care people are a key worker that can be of help. We have member care facilitators that are in each ministry area, or at least that is our goal, to have a member care facilitator. And the people who wear that hat, they also do other ministry, but they have kind of the temperament of a listener, encourager, comforter, like, anyway, the gifting that would be, let me walk alongside this person. So they're the closest to the person in their region, the member care facilitator. We have Timothy Network volunteers, and don't have them for every single region, but a lot of regions. And those are volunteers who actually physically come once or twice a year to be with people and just to pray with them, encourage them, read their prayer letters, pray for them when they're not on the field, babysit for them when they come to visit, give them a date night out if they're a couple with children. So, and then stay in touch with them. So they're very specific to a very narrow region. But that's just another level of member care. And you kind of alluded to Valerie Williams as our MK coordinator. So MK meaning missionary kid. So if they're having struggles with their children, Valerie has a lot of experience with kids, and being a former worker herself, knows kind of what kids go through when they're on the field. So she's a great person to ask too. So I don't know if I forgot anybody. I mean, Mike Bowden and I are both spiritual directors. So we have a male and a female spiritual director, and we're part of member care too. So we, come at things from a slightly different angle if we're meeting people for spiritual direction.
Yeah. Yeah. It is kind of like just concentric circles coming out of, you're getting care kind of from various directions, which is great. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about your role, your spiritual facilitator role. What does that look like in a practical sense when you're working with a missionary?
Yeah, for me, it's mostly video conversations with someone who really wants to talk about their relationship with the Lord. And it can be their great relationship with the Lord. It can be, I'm really not hearing from the Lord. I'm having struggles even being in scripture right now, or it could be anything, but it's focused mostly on just listening to how God and the Holy Spirit is active in their life. So it's slightly different than like I wear a member care hat as well. So I'm trying to like make a distinction because there's such a big overlap between the two, but member care, it can be more of a pastoral counseling. So if people are having a struggle of some sort and they need some resources, or they want to brainstorm to like problem solve, it's just a little different than strictly listening about their relationship with the Lord. And God is integrated into everything, so there's a huge overlap between the two, is all I'm saying. And I know Mike Bowden has done more traveling than me. I too have gone to some different regions and led some retreats. Mike has done that much more before COVID, traveling to different regions and offering spiritual retreats. When people come home on home assignment, there's opportunities if they want. I mean, Mike and I have each done these separately, and we've done some together, where we will take a couple or a single missionary and just give them a personal retreat day and be with them as they seek the Lord. A lot of silence is integrated into that, but some different kind of contemplative meditative exercises that we do, just seeking the Lord together on a retreat day. So anyway, those are some examples, but for me, my biggest part has been virtual conversations with people. That's how mine looks mostly.
Yeah, which is, yeah, so important to do. Um, so talk, a bit about like what team does. And I do think even for people who are watching this who are maybe they're looking around at various ministries or they're going with someone else, I still think that's helpful just to know kind of what is out there. What are the kinds of things that you can ask your organization about? Because obviously every missions agency wants to take good care of their people, but they're going to do that in various ways. And so knowing what your agency has to offer is really helpful, so that you can reach out and ask for that help when you need it. But I was wondering if you could share just a little bit about, for the prospective missionary who's not on the field yet, what are things that they can do for themselves to prepare for that first year of ministry?
Yeah, I'm going to say as best as you can to discern your motive for going, like really to discern that calling, like this is what God has really called to you and why you believe that to be true. I think that's something you can return to all the time when life gets hard in another place, to really clarify what motivates you to go and is it really the Lord? And of course, I mean, surrendering to God and whatever he asks, whatever he would do. But I love this story, this example of someone that I heard about. I don't know if anybody can do this, but I think this is a wonderful idea. There was a young man and he wanted to go to China, and he approached his church, and his church said, maybe, they're going to send him, but they weren't quite sure if he was ready. So they set it up so he could go and live in Chinatown. So he lived in the US in a region that was really, the culture was China. And he lived in an apartment. And early on in his living there were, the story goes, there were Chinese women who couldn't understand how this single guy could just be living in this place. And so they started bringing him meals, caring for him because he's just this single guy in this Chinese neighborhood. So anyway, he gained a lot of friendships, learned a lot about the culture, began to even learn the language before he got there and had to struggle with all of the culture. He was already pretty immersed. And then the beautiful ending to the story is when it came time for his church to commission him off to go, in the first rows of the church were like his Chinese community, like turning him off to go. And it's a tearjerker ending, but anyway, that would be the ideal, engaging in a ministry so fully like that before you're actually in the culture would be wonderful. That's a real extreme example, but however people can engage in their culture, in the language, like just engaging in it before they actually move, I would say would be a huge help to their preparation.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are so many, that is a big thing. But there are so many like smaller ways that you can engage. And actually, we'll drop this in the comments as well. But we recently on the team blog published a piece about how other missionaries have dived into cross-cultural ministry before going abroad, and just what that did to build a strong foundation for their ministries. So important, and such a, I didn't talk to anyone who said, well, it wasn't that big of a deal to my ministry. Yeah, so in closing, I wanted to ask to talked about missionaries, but we also mentioned earlier supporters and family and friends. And I think, we pray for the missionaries in our lives. We send them a check to support them over there. But what are some things that, if we have a loved one who's gone abroad, how can we help them and encourage them through that first year?
Yeah, I think the best help to them is if you're a decent listener and that validating some of the hard things that they're going through, like really understanding, wow, it sounds really hard and that must be hard. And I mean, now you know, because I'm telling you, oh, it's normal that it's really hard. I mean, I would even suggest if they know of another person that's in their first term, maybe they could suggest, have you talked to anybody else who's in the same season? Because I think sometimes just it normalizes, oh, you're having a hard time too. I'm not like just feeling like a loser. They're not a loser, but they feel like one in that stage. And so just to connect with someone else who's in that same season could be a good recommendation that a friend could give. But there's nothing you can do to rescue or fix it. It's sort of just writing it out with
Yeah.
your missionary to know that this is normal and it's hard and validate that, not try to move them along. I mean, they will get moved along, but I guess just be with them when it's hard would be my advice.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Well, if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat box. We'll see those there. But otherwise, Roni, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on here and sharing. I think these kinds of things are great to just kind of dispel some of the mystery around what it looks like to go overseas and break down some of those misconceptions that people might have. And we're really grateful for what you do. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, now it looks like we don't have any questions, so we'll just sign off and thank you everyone who watched with us.